Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to our second webinar series. My name is Ruth Wilcock, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ontario Brain Injury Association. And just to let everybody know, some of you may know and some of you may not, but Obaya has been educating people in the field of brain injury for close to 35 years. And we are excited to continue with the education and learning through these series of webinars. We are also pleased to be partnering with the Brain Changes Initiative. The founder of Brain Changes is Dr. Matthew Galati, and he sustained a life-threatening brain injury in 2013. And miraculously, he was able to complete his medical degree after his injury and is now a fully licensed physician. So just a little bit about Brain Changes Initiative as well. So just regarding any questions you may have during Dr. Sco's presentation, just please type them in the chat during the webinar, and Dr. Sco will be addressing these questions at the end of the presentation. So just before we begin, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Kylie James, who is a great friend of Obaya through the years. She's from Cora Nutrition, and I'd just like to ask her to say a few words about Dr. Sco, and Kylie has graciously agreed to sponsor this webinar, and we're just so grateful because we couldn't have done the webinars without you. So thank you again, Kylie, and over to you now.
Thanks so much, Ruth. So I'm super excited to hear this talk today. So Dr. Mary Scow holds a Bachelor of Science and a PhD in Nutritional Sciences from the University of Toronto. Mary is a former Vanier Scholar whose research has informed policy debates at Queen's Park and Toronto's Board of Health. In addition, she is an avid science communicator who is devoted to spreading the word about the importance of eating well as a means to prevent disease and live optimally. In the spring of 2021, Mary will graduate from medical school and plans to pursue family medicine with a focus on diet-related disease. So super excited to hear this talk on brain food and how to eat for optimal brain health.
All right, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start just by saying thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak. Also, thank you for the kind introduction. And most importantly, thank you to everyone who has come today. I'm so pleased and so honored that so many people have tuned in. I'm really excited to chat with you for the next 50 minutes or so. And I thank you all so much for being here. So in the next 50 minutes, what I hope to do is to answer this question for you, which is, can diet decrease risk for cognitive decline? Let's see if my slides advance. There we go. Whoop. But before we jump into the meat of today's presentation, I do want to start just telling you a little bit more about myself and my journey and how I became interested in this topic. So I usually tell people that my interest in nutrition started with a science fair project when I was 16. But the truth is I was definitely exposed to nutrition from very early on in life. This is me at a very young age watching my mom cook in the kitchen. These days, PubMed is my favorite place on the internet. So for those who might not be familiar, PubMed is basically the Google of scientific and medical research. So when you have a question and you want to know what literature exists on that topic or what is known about that topic, PubMed is the place to go. And I first became interested in the topic of brain, like the nutrition in the brain, in fact, many years ago in about 2008. So in 2008, I was a first-year undergraduate student. I had decided I was going to pursue nutrition for my career. And at that time, being thankfully a healthy young person, I wanted to know how to use nutrition to sort of biohack my life. So I thought, how can I use, being a student, learning and memorizing many things was high on my priority list. And I thought, can what I eat influence my ability to perform cognitively in my day-to-day life? So in 2008, I went on PubMed to see what literature existed about diet and the brain. And you can see here, PubMed shows you a little graph which illustrates how many articles are being published on a given topic in every year. So you can see this graph for the last few years. You can see where things were at in 2008 when I looked for nutrition in the brain. And I remember at that time when I looked for research on this topic, all I could find was tons of research on blueberries and the brain. That was what I learned, is like the more berries you eat, the better your brain functions. And that was basically it at that time in terms of what was known. And so I learned that and I sort of moved on, and I never really thought about this topic again for, in fact, many, many years. I revisited the topic about 2 years ago when I first began collaborating with the Brain Changes Initiative. So then 2 years ago, I went back to PubMed and realized that since I first looked at this literature, really like the research on this topic has exploded. As you can see here circled in red, like every year, the number of studies being published on this topic is increasing and increasing. So the exciting thing is we're learning more and more about the role that diet plays with respect to brain health. And today, what I hope to do is to share with you some of the highlights of this exciting research that's coming out. So who is today's presentation for? Well, everything that I'm going to say this afternoon is relevant for traumatic brain injury survivors, because we know that individuals who've had a moderate TBI are at 2 times higher risk for cognitive decline. Those who've had a severe TBI are at 4 times higher risk. The fact is, this is a high-risk group who is already at higher risk for cognitive decline, and thus anything that we can do to mitigate that risk is going to be very important in this population. But my comments this afternoon are not only for TBI survivors, because literally every single one of us is unfortunately at risk for cognitive decline. 1 in 9 people will develop Alzheimer's in their lifetime. 1 in 5 people will develop mild cognitive impairment. This is something that can potentially affect all of us. So that's why these comments are literally applicable to everyone. But at the same time, I think that's what makes topics like this so exciting, is the fact that there are things that we can do to mitigate risk. And today I hope to share with you what some of those things are. So, to get you thinking about this topic, I have a multiple choice question that you can everyone can just think about. You don't have to type in answers or anything like that. So what type of vegetable do you think has the greatest ability to prevent cognitive decline? Do you think it is leafy greens? Is it cruciferous vegetables, or is it root vegetables? I'll give you a second to think about that. And the answer is dark leafy green vegetables. I will explain why. So first, remember there are a lot of different types of dark leafy green vegetables. We're talking spinach, kale, collard greens, the whole list, as you can see, many different options in this group. This is the study where this information came from. So this is a study of 13,000 women that they followed over many years, looking at what they were eating and then doing cognitive testing on these women. And what they found in this study is that the women who ate the most dark leafy green vegetables had the greatest cognition down the road in terms of their ability to perform on the tests that were being done on them. So dark leafy green vegetables are good for preventing cognitive decline, but maybe you're wondering how and why. Why does this work? How does this even happen? Let's talk about that for the next couple minutes. So dark leafy green vegetables are very rich in a particular type of nutrient called carotenoids. I imagine many of you probably haven't heard of carotenoids before. They're a nutrient that doesn't get talked about as much as I think they should. And the term carotenoids doesn't refer to a single nutrient. In fact, it's a whole family of nutrients. There may be as many as 100 or more different compounds within this family. But today I'm going to be talking about some of the most famous carotenoids, them being lutein, zeaxanthin, and beta carotene are the ones I'm going to focus on. Carotenoids are found in a number of places. As I've already mentioned, carotenoids are found in all of your dark leafy green vegetables, but carotenoids are also found in red fruits and vegetables, yellow, as well as orange fruits and vegetables. There's a range of places where you can get this nutrient from. And the old saying, you are what you eat, is actually quite literal when we're talking about carotenoids, because when you eat carotenoids, those nutrients end up collecting in your liver, they collect in your eyes, in your skin, in your fat, and relevant for today's presentation, these carotenoids end up accumulating in your brain. So I hope that you'll never think about these foods the same way again after today's presentation, because your brain, in fact, is full of carotenoids. So every time you eat leafy greens, yellow bell peppers, or carrots, what you're eating is literally going to end up inside your brain. You literally are what you eat. But what are those nutrients doing when they get there? In order to understand what those nutrients do in our brain, I want you to think about your neurons. Neuron is just the fancy word for brain cell. So everybody has, 80 something billion neurons in their brain, and that's how the brain functions, all of these neurons working together. And in order to understand the role that carotenoids play with respect to these neurons, I have a little analogy. I want you to think of your brain cells as being like this castle. So just like this castle has many important things going on inside, your brain cell has a lot of important things that it has to do. And just like this castle has a wall that you can see in this picture that surrounds it, your brain cells also have a wall. And the wall has a very important function, because without the wall, invaders can get in, bad things can happen. The wall is essential in order to protect this castle. And your brain cells also have a wall that's important to protect them. So what happens is when you eat carotenoids, those carotenoids end up in the wall that surrounds your brain cell. And their job there is that they protect the brain cell from damage. They protect it from any sort of thing that might be attacking it, that it might be exposed to. Those carotenoids are there to ensure the brain cell's safety and survival. This is a study where they actually looked at the carotenoid levels in elderly populations and compared those who had really good cognitive performance to those who didn't perform as well on cognitive tests. And what they found is that people who had more higher levels of carotenoids in their blood, guess what? They tended to perform better on cognitive tests. This is a study particularly of Alzheimer's patients, and they found the same thing. When you compared those who were diagnosed with Alzheimer's to those who weren't diagnosed with Alzheimer's had higher levels of carotenoids, while those who were, unfortunately, had lower levels. And this here is a very interesting study, because this is a study where they took not elderly people, they took 50-year-old people who were healthy, and this is a randomized controlled trial. So it's a very rigorous study, a very high level of evidence. And what they did is at the start of the study, they did cognitive testing on all of these 50-year-old individuals. Then for 6 months, these individuals ate one avocado every single day. And then after 6 months of eating an avocado every single day, they performed cognitive tests again. And guess what? Those who were eating the avocado every day outperformed those who were in the control group who were not eating an avocado every day. And the scientists thought that this is because avocados contain lutein, which is a type of carotenoid, and lutein is a very important carotenoid in terms of brain health. So let's talk about avocados for a second. So as I just mentioned, avocados contain this particular type of carotenoid, which is called lutein. And the important thing that you need to know about lutein is that lutein is the most abundant carotenoid in the brain. So it is there in higher levels than any other carotenoid there is. But it's very interesting though, because if you compare the lutein level that's in one avocado versus the lutein level that's in a cup of spinach, spinach actually contains 10 times more lutein than the avocado contains. So that's part of why spinach is so good for the brain as well, as we mentioned, at the beginning of today's presentation. But the authors of this study made a very interesting point, which is they highlighted that when you're eating an avocado, you're not just getting lutein, you're also getting that lutein in a context that's very unique and unlike other fruits and vegetables, because avocados are a rare example of a fruit that's very high in fat. So they made the point that when you eat an avocado, you're absorbing 100%, you're getting all of the lutein that's in there. Meanwhile, when you eat something like leafy greens, you don't necessarily get all of the lutein that's there. You might only absorb 50%. But then that being said, if you do the math, even though you don't get as many of the lutein, you get as much of the lutein out of the spinach, you still would then theoretically get 5 times more lutein just because it had so much more to begin with. So I thought this is very interesting. In preparation for today's presentation, I did a quick Google search to see, You know, what is the internet saying about nutrition and brain health? And it's very interesting because this is one of the first hits. It's a WebMD article looking at, you know, eating smart for a healthy brain. And it's funny when you read these articles, what nutrient or what food is always mentioned. Avocados are always mentioned in these articles. But what food is not mentioned? Leafy greens, despite the fact that leafy greens have even more lutein than the avocados. And there's a very simple and clear reason for this. It has to do with the level of evidence. So that study that I showed you about the avocados is a randomized controlled trial. Randomized controlled trials are the most rigorous and highest level of evidence, and the avocado has that behind it. Meanwhile, even though the leafy greens have 10 times more lutein and thus potentially much greater potential to improve our brain health, the leafy greens are only backed by observational studies. This is a lower level of evidence, and thus perhaps not as rigorously understood or demonstrated. The reason I'm telling you this story is because I want to remind you that all of the knowledge and information that we have about, you know, in the field of nutrition science, at least, is a product of research, which is an important thing. But at the same time, all of the research that is being done is a product of who is willing to pay for that research, right? Money produces research, which produces knowledge and information. And I think this is really important to highlight because what I didn't tell you when I shared that avocado research with you is that that study happened to be funded by the avocado industry. Now, I'm not saying that to devalue the study. I think avocados are excellent and they're very healthy. And I've eaten a number of avocados this week myself. So I'm not trying to devalue that research in this context. I think it was quite rigorously performed and believable. I believe their results. But at the same time, it's just to illustrate that that's why you see, for example, avocados being mentioned in every article about brain health, but you don't see leafy greens. It's just because no one has paid for that study to be done yet. And thus we just don't hear about that, even though it's a food with a higher level of lutein. So this is just to remind you that evidence is important. It's very, very important. But at the same time, it's important to always remember that evidence also has its own limitations. So I started talking a little bit about the absorption of carotenoids a minute ago, right? We said in the context of lutein, you only absorb about 50% of the lutein that's in leafy greens. But now I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the absorption of another carotenoid and hopefully illustrate for you that when it comes to nutrition, it's not what you eat that matters, it's what you absorb. So in order to get you thinking about this topic, I have another multiple choice question. So this time, this is about beta carotene, so another member of the carotenoid family. And my question for you is, when you eat spinach, how much of its beta carotene do you absorb? And I should mention also, beta carotene is another carotenoid that has been linked with improved cognitive performance. So when you eat the spinach, do you get 5% of the carotenoid, beta carotene? Do you get 45%? Or do you get 65%? I'll let you think about that for a second, and I will reveal the answer. So in fact, when you eat leafy greens, particularly spinach, you only absorb 5% of the beta carotene that it contains. At that level of absorption, you would have to eat 20 cups of spinach in order to get 1 day's worth of beta carotene. So clearly, that does not work. We need to do something about this. And there's something that we can do. Don't worry, it's a good news story. There is something we can do about it. And in order to illustrate what needs to be done, I have a little story to tell you. And the story that I'm going to tell you is about Popeye. So I imagine everyone is familiar with the lovable cartoon character Popeye. Popeye is famous for loving spinach. Whenever he finds himself in a difficult situation, he downs a can of spinach, his muscles pop up, and he does whatever needs to be done. So Popeye loves spinach. Popeye also loves olive oil. So olive oil is Popeye's girlfriend. Olive oil comes from a family where everyone is named after some sort of oil. Her mother is banana oil. Her brother is castor oil. And I think it's really neat that if you think about the two things Popeye loves spinach and he loves olive oil, those two things are really meant to be together. And that's because when you combine your spinach or any leafy green with olive oil, or technically any oil or fat, that increases the absorption of the carotenoids in those leafy greens. And there is a really elegant study which illustrated this really well. So in this study, they fed people the exact same salad, except they fed it to them in two ways. They fed them this salad first with fat-free dressing, and then they fed them the exact same salad with regular dressing. And with the regular dressing, they were getting about 2 tablespoons of oil. And guess what? When they ate the salad with the regular dressing, they absorbed 40 times more beta carotene, 40. So as you can see, the idea of having fat-free dressing is actually a really bad idea. When you eat your salad without fat, you're not getting what that salad offers you. And that's why things like fat-free dressing are unfortunately a very misguided, bad idea. I have to admit, I used to do this. I used to eat salads without dressing, thinking that was really healthy and I was going to like cut down on my fat intake, but it's 100% the wrong thing to do. So don't buy fat-free dressing. When you're eating salad or any kind of vegetable, it's important to have at least a little bit of fat there in order to aid your absorption. Now, I have to say, I really love this Popeye story. I wondered about so E.C. Seeger is the creator of Popeye, and he created Popeye in the 1930s. And I was just like, how did he come up with this? Like, was this planned? Is this just a really nice coincidence? I was so enchanted by this story. I did some research on the history of it. I even talked to some cartoon historians to try to get greater insight into what guided this choice and this decision. And what I learned is that, so in the 1930s, when E.C. Seeger created Popeye, America was in the midst of the Depression. The kids were very malnourished, and homegrown crops like spinach were not doing so well. In fact, at the time, the public's perception of leafy greens was very different from today. At the time, people saw leafy greens as being cow's food or horse's food. It wasn't even really seen as being humans' food. So it's possible that E.C. Seeger chose spinach as a means to just sort of help people's health and encourage kids to eat spinach. And in fact, he accomplished that. When Popeye came out, spinach sales increased by 40%. He saved the spinach industry. In fact, this is a statue that is in Crystal City, Texas, the spinach capital of the world. Honoring Popeye because of what he's done for their industry. And so did E.C. Seeger plan this beautiful combination of spinach and olive oil? Probably not from a nutritional science point of view, but I think it worked out really well. And I just love this story. So I hope that you guys will remember this in the future, these two things that are meant to be together, both spinach and olive oil. I do want to mention, as I did say briefly earlier, so olive oil is associated with improved cognition. So when you combine your leafy greens with olive oil, you're getting the best of both worlds. Both foods are working for you. But technically, any oil or fat will increase the absorption of carotenoids. This isn't something that is specific to olive oil. So in theory, something else would get the job done as well. So throughout today's presentation, I'm going to be giving you a number of nutrition prescriptions, just really summarizing the most important information that I think you can take away from today's presentation. So my first nutrition prescription for you is to eat dark leafy green vegetables every single day, and don't forget to combine them with olive oil. Now, if you're thinking that the solution is to take a beta carotene supplement, I caution against that. And the reason is because this is a study where they tried that. They gave men beta carotene supplements and measured their cognition to see if in a supplement form, this nutrient could do the same things. Guess what? It didn't work. And that's because supplements simply are not the same as food. There are so many differences. There's so much more going on in the food context. So there is, unfortunately, no easy answer. You have to eat the real food. And this is just to remind you of that. All right, so let's go back to leafy greens for a second. So I told you eating leafy greens were the vegetable that had the greatest potential to decrease risk for cognitive decline. At what age do you think you need to start eating leafy greens to prevent cognitive decline? Do you think it's age 40? Do you think it's age 50? Or is it age 60? I will give you a minute to think about that. So I selected 40. The truth is, this question, there should be as early as possible because that's the real answer. The reason I made the answer 40 is because of this particular study. So this is another analysis of the same population I spoke to you about at the beginning, 13,000 women. They followed these women starting in 1978. And this study was published, I think, in the 2000s at some point. And what they found is that the carotenoids that these women were eating in 1978 predicted their cognitive performance 30 years later. So that's really remarkable because it means what you're eating today is potentially going to affect your brain health. Not only today, it does affect your brain health today, but also 30 years from now. So when we're talking about eating to prevent cognitive decline, the truth is you can never start too early. The earlier you start, the better. They did show in this study that the carotenoids that the women were eating later in life made a bigger difference. So you can't do it all early and then stop. But the point is, the earlier you start, the better. And when I say the earlier you start focusing on eating for your brain, the better, I literally mean as early as possible. We know that even the infant brain accumulates carotenoids, particularly lutein. We know that the infant brain has a higher concentration of lutein compared to adults. And guess what? The amount of lutein that's ending up in that infant brain, it's a product of what the infant is eating. So if a baby is being breastfed and its mother is eating a lot of carotenoid-rich vegetables, guess what? Her milk has more carotenoid-rich vegetables, and thus her baby accumulates more carotenoids in their brain. And then if a baby's being fed formula, whether or not they're getting lutein and carotenoids depends on which formula they're being fed, because not all formulas even contain lutein. So this whole issue of eating for optimal brain health is a bigger issue that starts really early in life, and there's many considerations and many things that we need to be thinking about in order to optimize the health of, of our loved ones and of our patients. If I still have not motivated you about the importance of eating leafy green vegetables and carotenoid-rich vegetables, I have one more form of motivation, and this one is in the form of vanity. So remember when I was showing you this little stick human and talking about how you are what you eat, and I talked about the different places where the carotenoids end up? Well, one of the places I mentioned is that carotenoids also end up in your skin. That's correct. So if you look at this little diagram here, you can see that the carotenoids end up in the epidermis. And just like the role that the carotenoids play in the brain, where they're protecting our brain cells from damage and protecting our brain cells from aging, when you have more carotenoids in your skin, guess what? Those nutrients also protect your skin from aging. So they're not just good for the brain, they're also good for the skin. So for keeping both a healthy mind and a healthy look, carotenoids are really your go-to best friend. I do want to go back to this multiple choice question that we started with when I said to you, what type of vegetable has the greatest ability to prevent cognitive decline? The answer was leafy greens, correct. But the truth is, all of these vegetables pictured in that particular study were shown to have a very large effect on preventing cognitive decline. Cruciferous vegetable also did great things. Root vegetables also had a great effect. In terms of the statistical analysis, the leafy greens were like a little bit better, but they all play the same role and they all do many of the same things. So really, when it comes to preventing cognitive decline, I want you to remember that the more vegetables you eat and the greater variety as well, the better. It really does come down to that. I always feel kind of silly when I tell people that the most important thing they can do is to eat as many vegetables as well as fruits as possible, because it's one of those pieces of advice that's, it's just sage advice. It's the thing that your grandmother might tell you. It's really a very simple piece of advice, but it's really the most powerful and most important advice that anyone can give you. So even though I've been studying nutrition for over a decade now, the best piece of advice I have is this, not just for the brain, but also for everything. It's all about eating vegetables and fruits. It is that simple. So my next nutrition prescription for you is to strive to eat as many different types of vegetables as possible every single day. So as I said, this is a very simple piece of advice and simple tip. But because I have been spending so many years studying nutrition and trying to understand what these foods do for us, I want to spend the next couple of minutes showing you one of the unique ways that vegetables improves our health. It's not just the role that they play in delivering these particular nutrients, which we then, take up into our brain and other parts of our body. There's many things these foods are doing for us. So in order to explain to you another reason why vegetables are so important for your brain and for other reasons, I would like to talk about bacteria. I bet you didn't think that's what I was going to say, but I do. I did want to say that we are going to talk about bacteria for the next couple minutes, but not just any bacteria. We're going to talk about the bacteria that live inside of you. A lot of people get grossed out at this point and they're like, ew, but the truth is we all have bacteria inside of us. It's actually a good thing. And we're going to talk about that. To get you thinking about this topic, I have another multiple choice question. How much bacteria do you think the average person has inside of them? Do you think it's 1/4 to 1.5 pounds, 1 to 2 pounds, or is it 2 to 6 pounds? I'll give you a second to think about that. And the answer is 2 to 6 pounds. Now, this is an active area of research and scientists are trying to figure out, the exact amount. It probably varies person to person, and maybe this number will change as we learn more. But for now, what we know is that we all have literally pounds of bacteria inside of us. And those bacteria mainly live in our large intestine, as illustrated here. So you can see they're happy bacteria, they're good. They work for us, they help us. This is how you want things to be. A few more facts about you that you probably didn't realize. So these 2 to 6 pounds that we all have is what scientists sometimes call the microbiota or the microbiome. Within those pounds, there's 500 to 1,000 different species of bacteria, 7,000 different strains of bacteria. And in fact, scientists estimate that there is more bacterial DNA inside of you than human DNA. In fact, not just a little more, 100 times more. So the fact is, we got a whole lot of bacteria inside of us, and it's really an ecosystem. We have an ecosystem inside of us, and they are doing many things for us, which I'll show you in a minute. But within that 2 to 6 pounds of all those different species and all those different strains, there's a mix. Some of the bacteria that live inside of us are very good and they help us, and scientists call those probacteria. But then there's also some bad bacteria. And when I say bad bacteria, I'm not talking about like E. coli and salmonella, those ones that like really make you sick. These bad bacteria are just ones that don't work as well for you as you would like or as you would need. So problems start to happen when your large intestine starts to look like this. When these bad, angry bacteria start to grow and proliferate and outcompete the good bacteria, you are starting to be at risk for a number of different things. And the reason these bad bacteria are a problem is because these bad bacteria talk to the immune system. In fact, both of the types of bacteria talk to the immune system. When the good bacteria pick up the phone and talk to the immune system, they say, how's everything going? We're just chilling down here in the large intestine. All is good. Life is good. The immune cells are very happy and pleased to receive that message from the good bacteria. And your immune system sends out signals of calmness that makes your body feel good and well and all is good. But what happens when the bad bacteria pick up the phone and talk to the immune system? Well, now the immune cells are getting a different signal. Now the immune cells are a little worried about all of the things that the bad bacteria are telling them. This results in the immune cells releasing, really creating a state of chaos inside the body and what some would call inflammation. This is a problem because those inflammatory signals that the bad bacteria tell the immune system to release then flood your whole body. They're throughout your whole bloodstream, and this also has implications for your brain. Let's talk about the brain again for a second. So just like every brain cell has that wall that surrounds it, your entire brain, because it's so important, has a wall that surrounds it as well. We call that the blood-brain barrier, and I've illustrated that here with a brick wall to help you imagine that, your brain, it's surrounded by this brick wall. Bad things are not supposed to get in, and the truth is, most of the things that are floating around in your bloodstream don't get into the brain, even the bad things, because the blood-brain barrier keeps them out. However, one of the unique things about these chaotic immune signals, what scientists call cytokines, is that these immune signals do get across the blood-brain barrier. And then they enter the brain, and that has many potential consequences for brain health. While we're on this topic of the blood-brain barrier, I also want to highlight, remember the carotenoids that we talked about at the beginning of today's presentation? Well, part of why they're so uniquely helpful for the brain is because they are one example of a rare nutrient that does get across the blood-brain barrier, and that's how they get into the brain and then take up residence there and then help you. So now I've shown you what those good and bad bacteria can do. The question is, how do you maintain a healthy balance of these good and bad bacteria? Well, another thing that I hope you'll realize from today's presentation and never see your food the same way again is the fact that every time you eat, you are not just feeding you. You are feeding all of the bacteria that live inside of you, and they are hungry. And they like what they eat what you eat. So what you eat determines who flourishes inside of you. Good bacteria, they like to eat fruits and vegetables. They like to eat whole grains. They like to eat beans and legumes. And the reason for this is simple. It's because good bacteria eat fiber. On the other hand, bad bacteria, what do they like to eat? Well, bad bacteria like to eat, all that yummy stuff that people like. This is what bad bacteria thrive on. And when you eat more of these foods, you promote the growth of the bad bacteria. And now you know what that does when they call up the immune system and tell them about what's going on. Let's take a moment and talk about fiber. The thing that makes fiber so unique among nutrients is the fact that fiber survives digestion. So most of your foods are digested in the stomach and in the large intestine, and all of their nutrients are absorbed. And what's sent to the large intestine is just the waste, what's going to be gotten rid of, but not fiber. Fiber reaches the large intestine intact. And the reason is because once it gets there, it feeds these bacteria that live there. It's recommended that women should consume 25 grams of fiber per day and men should consume 38. So right here is what 25 grams looks like. A cup of oats, an apple, a cup of lentils, and a cup of spinach. That'll get you 25 grams. And if you're a man and you need 38 grams, you can add an avocado, which is also a very fiber-rich fruit, which adds another 13 grams. This might make it look like it's easy to get a day's worth of fiber because I have selected the most fiber-rich foods. But you can imagine if you're not eating like this every single day, you're not getting enough fiber. And in fact, 95% of people don't meet the daily recommended amount of fiber. And the worst part is those daily recommendations of 25 grams for women and 38 grams for men, many believe is inadequate recommendation because our ancestors probably ate 100 grams of fiber per day. So we should probably be eating even more than the 25 to 38 grams that's recommended for us. So the moral of the story is the more fiber you eat, the more you feed your good bacteria, and thus the more good bacteria you have living inside of you, the easier it is to create and maintain a state of calmness, both in the body and in the brain. Let's talk about some of the foods that are really rich in fiber. So when we're talking about fruits, apples, pears, all of the berries, pomegranates, and of course avocado are very, very rich sources of fiber in the fruit category. When it comes to vegetables, I mean, all vegetables have more fiber than most other foods, but the most richest sources of fiber in the vegetable category are Brussels sprouts, okra, turnips, artichokes, green beans, as well as all the leafy greens, broccoli, and of course, asparagus. When it comes to legumes, literally, they're all really high in fiber. So we don't even need to go through them. Legumes are high in fiber, end of story. And when it comes to grains, this is really interesting. I talked about oatmeal already. Your whole grain breads also are going to have more fiber. I think that barley on the left here is the healthiest grain there is for so many reasons. I won't give you all of that today, but I think barley is fantastic. Brown rice, for instance, has 4 times more fiber than white rice. So that's an important swap that can be made. And then the other food that I mentioned here is popcorn. So 1 cup of popcorn contains 8 grams of fiber. So if you think about that, you could have 3 cups of popcorn, and for a woman, you could be at your day's worth of fiber. So there are some unique and fun and different ways where you can get fiber, but these are just some ideas. And again, I've made this point already in today's presentation, and I'll make it again. The types of fiber that are in an artichoke are not the same as the type that you would get if you took a fiber supplement. Most fiber supplements are one type of fiber. I think that taking a fiber supplement is better than having 0 fiber whatsoever, but at the end of the day, it's not the same as getting the fiber from food. So my next nutrition prescription for you today is to feed yourself and your microbiota lots of fiber every day. But I do want to caution you, if you're going to increase your fiber intake, you must do this very slowly. If you've got a large intestine that's currently inhabited by a lot of those bad bacteria and you start eating more fiber, those bad bacteria are going to freak out. And when they freak out, you are going to have a lot of unpleasant side effects. I will allow your imagination to run with that thought. So do not increase your fiber drastically overnight. If you're going to increase fiber intakes, it needs to be done slowly. And also, the second most important thing you must know about increasing fiber intakes is that you must match fiber with water. Anytime you eat more fiber, you must also drink more water. So there you go, the third nutrition prescription of this afternoon. I do want to speak briefly about fish and omega-3s. They're another one of the very classic brain foods. And I'm going to cut right to the research here. This is a meta-analysis of 21 studies where they followed people over their lifetimes, looking at how much fish they were eating. And what they found is that people who eat more fish, guess what? They perform better on cognitive tests and they have less cognitive decline. The reason for this is very simple. Your brain is literally made from omega-3 fatty acids. Fish are a very rich source of omega-3 fatty acids. And I want to add at that, they're not just any type of omega-3. They're a type that's called DHA, or docosahexaenoic acid. DHA is what you can remember. And DHA is the specific type of omega-3 that our brain cells are made from. And that's why fish are so important. Not all fish have DHA. The ones with the most content, salmon by far more than any other fish has the highest levels of DHA, but also other oily fish like mackerel, herring, sardines, and anchovies are also good choices. This is a study where they gave people, it's a systematic review where they looked at many studies that gave people omega-3 supplements to see what effect that had on preventing cognitive decline. And just like I've shown you with everything else today, unfortunately, the supplements do not perform as well as the real food. So it's about eating your omega-3s, not just taking them. So my fourth nutrition prescription for today is to eat 2 to 3 servings, a serving being approximately 3 ounces of fatty fish every week. And the reason I landed at that is because that's the amount in the study that seemed to have the greatest benefit. In that study, they did show the more, the better. But when you get into really high intakes of fish, then you run into issues around like contaminations and toxins and things like that. So 2 to 3 is probably a very safe amount. We have to talk about walnuts. Walnuts are one of those foods that looks like a brain, quite literally, as you can see in this photograph. And walnuts are another food that has some interesting brain protective effects associated with it. This is a study where they looked at how many walnuts people were eating and how they performed on cognitive tests. And guess what? People who ate more walnuts did better on the cognitive tests. Why do you think walnuts protect against cognitive decline? Do you think that it's because of the omega-3s they contain? Do you think it's because of the vitamin E they contain? Do you think it's because of their selenium, their magnesium, or is it all of the above? I'll give you a minute to think about it. And the answer is all of the above. I think that when we think about walnuts, we often think, okay, this is a source of omega-3s. That must be why it's good for the brain. The truth is, walnuts contain a different type of omega-3 than fish. It's still good. It's still anti-inflammatory. I won't get into the details of this today. But what I do want you to learn from today's presentation is that there are so many reasons why walnuts are helpful for our brain. The omega-3s might be one of the reasons, but they're also rich in vitamin E, selenium, magnesium. I think it's it's all of these things, and the way in which all of these things work together is the real reason why walnuts have been shown to have this effect. This is an interesting study because this is a landmark study of the Mediterranean diet. It's a randomized controlled trial where they put people on 3 diets. Some people were eating a Mediterranean diet with olive oil, so the very traditional version of the Mediterranean diet. Other people were eating the Mediterranean diet whereby instead of olive oil, they were eating walnuts. And then the third group of people were eating the Mediterranean diet, but it was a low-fat version. And what they found in this study is, guess what? Whether you had olive oil or whether you had walnuts, risk for cognitive decline was equally mitigated. It was only on the low-fat diet that people had greater risk for cognitive decline. And I think that's really important because it illustrates that, you know, even though I've highlighted specific foods for you today, it's not that one single food is the absolute one and only route to protecting your brain. There are many foods. So whether you're eating a lot of olive oil or whether you're eating a lot of walnuts, in this study, they illustrated that both could achieve the same outcome. And I think that's really important to remember. And then I have another question. Are walnuts the only nuts that protect against cognitive decline? The truth is, when you look at this study, they showed it didn't matter what type of nuts women were eating. As long as they were eating more nuts, those who ate more nuts had better cognitive performance than those who ate fewer nuts. And I think this is interesting because, again, this might be one of those situations where the reason we have so much evidence for walnuts is because maybe there's just more research on walnuts. And if we researched every single nut in relation to cognitive decline, maybe we would have a lot more to talk about as well. So it's not just walnuts, it's all nuts, because nuts, they're another plant-based food. They're growing, they're collecting nutrients from the soil, they're giving us a lot of good things. So my 5th and 6th nutrition prescriptions for you this afternoon are to eat 3 to 4 whole walnuts daily. That's the amount that they found in the study to be protective, and or other nuts too. And also to consume olive oil daily, because it's another food that can protect against cognitive decline. I don't want to spend too much time today harping on the foods to avoid, because I think often we know what we need to avoid. It's actually often quite obvious, but I do want to mention one particular food or nutrient, which is sugar, because I think sugar is problematic really for all of human health, but also for the brain. And I think we don't always realize that it's not just the metabolic diseases that are affected by sugar. Brain health is impacted as well. And when I talk about sugar, I'm not just talking about the sugar that you find in desserts and baked goods and processed foods. The truth is, white, refined, processed carbohydrates in the body perform and do the exact same things sugar do. It's actually indistinguishable from sugar inside the body. So things like white bread and white rice are problematic for this reason, and sometimes are no worse than pure white sugar. I do want to mention that when I'm talking about sugar, I'm not talking about the sugar that comes from fruit. Fruit is an entirely different context. The sugar is absorbed and metabolized very differently, and it doesn't get you into trouble the same way these other sources of sugar do. I have a story that I'm going to share with you, and it's to illustrate how sometimes sugar can be hiding in plain sight. Because, there are those settings where it's very obvious that you're getting sugar. So for instance, when you're lined up at the candy kitchen, you know what you're getting. There is no surprises there. You are getting sugar, and it's very obvious that you're getting sugar. But there's also these situations where it is not so obvious. And to illustrate that, I have another story to tell you. So one day I was walking down Yonge Street, and there was some promotion going on, and they were handing out this veggie-based non-dairy drink. Now, I do want to mention, I'm not picking on this product. I only tell this story because this product came to me. So this product was handed to me on the street. I thought, okay, sure, I'll try this veggie-based non-dairy product. Took it home and I tried it. And it's very interesting because when you look on the front of the package, it says that it's unsweetened. When you look at the nutrition facts table, it says 0 grams of sugar. So I thought, sounds very healthy, looks very low in sugar. I take a drink and it tastes quite sweet, which is very interesting. So I turned it over and I looked at the ingredient list. And I've typed out what the ingredient list says in case it's too difficult to read at the top. So the first thing that this beverage has is filtered water. Okay, fair enough. But you look at the second ingredient, and the second ingredient is this quote unquote proprietary vegetable blend. And what they state is within that proprietary vegetable blend is pea protein, tapioca starch, potato starch, protease, and amylase. So we got some proteins and some starches. And then these last two items are actually enzymes. So enzymes are things that your body produces to digest food. And to illustrate what's going on here, starch is really a chain of sugar molecules. So starch looks like this. Those enzymes, I want you to think of enzymes as being like scissors. Enzymes are digestive scissors that cut up starches. So what happens when you put starches in the same place as enzymes? Well, those enzymes cut up that starch and now you've got sugar. So when they put a quote unquote proprietary vegetable blend in their product, what they were really doing was they had come up with a very clever way of putting sugar in a product, but without having to say that they put sugar in a product. So this is just one example. There are so many examples of this, of how, sometimes something can literally say it has 0 grams of sugar in it, but that's not totally true when you take a closer look. So in fact, this product really should have said 1, filtered water, 2, sugar, because that's the truth. And the moral of this story really is that if something tastes too good to be true, it probably is. Having been in nutrition for a really long time, people always ask me, what is the secret to healthy eating? And the truth is there is no secret. It's actually very simple and very straightforward. The key to healthy eating is balance. This is very true today. We know that in 500 BC, Plato talked about healthy eating, and he also said it was about balance. And basically, if the foundation of your diet is fruits and vegetables, you will be fine. The details can fall into place. That is really it. It's about balance. It's about the big picture, and it's about ensuring that fruits and vegetables are the mainstay. If you're looking for some inspiration and ideas about how to incorporate the principles that I've talked about today into your life, some members of the Brain Changes team are putting together a cookbook that is forthcoming based on all of these types of foods that are good for the brain. So if you want more information about that, I do encourage you to follow Brain Changes, because that is coming down the pipeline very soon. And before I wrap up today, I do want to acknowledge that at the end of the day, there are many risk factors for cognitive decline, right? It's not just nutrition, it's so many other things. Nutrition is one piece of a very, very large puzzle. And I don't want anyone to leave today thinking that nutrition is the be all end all, or that nutrition is the one and only thing, because it's not. Risk for cognitive decline is a product of many things and the interaction of those things. It's how this puzzle fits together. I like talking about nutrition because I think nutrition is it's one modifiable risk factor. Every day we eat, and thus every day we have the opportunity to make a decision or make a choice that can have a huge impact on our health today and in the long term. So that's why I like to talk about nutrition, and why I think it's an important risk factor to focus on. But at the end of the day, it is one of many, and it's about the big picture. So I started off today's presentation with the question, can diet decrease risk for cognitive decline? And I hope that I've convinced you and illustrated for you that the answer to this question is indeed yes, it can. And okay, so we've talked about a lot of things today, many, many things. I just want to end by quickly recapping some of the most important parts, because I know we flew through tons of information in the last hour. So we started off today by talking about how, there's been a lot of research on blueberries for a long time. So berries are good for your brain. But some research suggests that leafy greens might be the vegetable with the greatest potential to decrease risk for cognitive decline. We talked about how your brain is literally full of carotenoids, that type of nutrient that's rich in leafy greens, and that those carotenoids are protecting every brain cell in your brain, are encircled by these carotenoids. But in order to get the greatest amount of carotenoids from leafy green vegetables, you do need to make sure you're always combining your leafy greens with some sort of oil or fat. Think of Popeye and olive oil. And as much as leafy greens are good, they are one of many vegetables, and all vegetables in total work towards decreasing your risk for cognitive decline. So the more vegetables you eat, the better. And part of that is because every time you eat vegetables, you're not just feeding you, you're also feeding the bacteria that live inside of you. So don't forget, they talk to your immune system and they tell your immune system what's going on and whether to create a sense of chaos or a state of calm. And those bacteria, of course, they live in your large intestine and they like to eat fiber. We also talked briefly about the importance of fish and how your brain is literally made of the omega-3s that come from fish. We talked about walnuts, another great brain food. I shared an example of how something tastes too good to be true. It probably is. And finally, I hope that you leave today remembering that at the end of the day, it's all about balance. That is really the most important piece of advice that I can give anybody. It's balance. It's about emphasizing fruits and vegetables. And in case you missed it, I just want to leave you with this image, which is the nutrition prescriptions that I handed out today. And of course, these are not prescriptions to be filled at the pharmacy. They're prescriptions that can be filled at the grocery store. So thank you everyone so much for listening. I really enjoyed speaking with all of you this afternoon. I hope that you enjoyed the information that I shared, and I hope that this inspires you to make healthy choices that will benefit your brain, not only today, but for many years to come. Thanks everyone for listening.
Hi, Mary.
Yep.
Hey, all I could say is, wow, what a presentation. We're so privileged to have you on our advisory board as our nutrition expert. What an amazing presentation around eating for brain health. I think you've sold all 350 people who are tuning in today on eating their green leafy vegetables. Just before we get into the questions, I wanted to introduce myself and Brain Changes. So I'm Dr. Matthew Galati. I'm the founder of Brain Changes Initiative. Brain Changes was founded in 2019, and it was inspired by my own traumatic brain injury. And the mission of Brain Changes Initiative is to fund groundbreaking research to help change the standard of care for traumatic brain injury, but we also serve as an avenue of awareness, education, and support for traumatic brain injury patients, their families, healthcare providers, and even people who just want to live a brain healthy lifestyle. So like Mary said, please follow us at Brain Changes. We'd also like to give a huge thank you to Obaya. We're so honored to have partnered with Obaya on this event. You guys are an incredible organization doing great things. And I'd also like to extend a thank you to Cora Nutrition for sponsoring today's talk with Mary. Mary, there are a few questions for you, so let's get started here. So first question, is it better to eat vegetables raw or cooked? Or does it depend on the source?
That's a really good question. And it's actually a trade-off, because the whole thing is when you cook vegetables, you sometimes increase the levels of certain nutrients, but then decrease levels of others. So I'll give an example of like boiling broccoli. When you boil broccoli, you lose some of the B vitamins because those are water soluble. So they leave the broccoli and enter the water. But when you cook broccoli, you actually change the proteins that are in the broccoli, and then you make the beta carotene, in fact, easier to absorb as well. And the same goes for carrots, would follow the same principles. So I think at the end of the day, it's a trade-off. And if in your diet you're eating some cooked and some raw, I think you're going to be totally fine. I love questions like this because questions like this come from like super healthy people who are trying to maximize every nutrient. And I think that I usually tell people, if you're eating vegetables, you are doing really good. This like little minuscule detail will not make or break your diet. But great question.
And maybe this is one of my own questions, and I know, Mary, we've discussed this before, but in terms of like oils and fats, like, does it matter if cooked versus raw? Can you comment on that?
In terms of like cooking different, like heating different types of oils and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing about, for example, olive oil, I talked about olive oil a lot in today's presentation. When you eat olive oil, you're not just getting fat, you're also getting tons of nutrients in the context of that oil. Sometimes when you heat olive oil, you're destroying some of those nutrients. And the other thing is when you heat oils too high, there's a threshold at which then the composition of the oil can change. It can chemically actually become different. So this can become a problem, but it's if you heat it too high. So for example, on low heats, olive oil is fine. On really, really high heats, when it starts smoking, you're going to be losing some of the benefits that you could be getting there. And different oils have different smoke points. So it's something to pay attention to and to look into. I know the whole conversation around dietary fats, I feel could be its own presentation. I didn't even touch it today because I thought there's so many things to be said on that topic of great importance. So maybe that'll be like phase 2 next time. But there's definitely so many more stories yet to tell about all of the foods in relation to brain health for sure.
Awesome. That was a great answer. Thank you, Mary. So next question. Oh, interesting. Would avocado on a salad be a fat to help with absorption?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. In fact, I almost showed some research. This literal topic has been studied in research. So there's been studies where they've given people salads with avocado, and they've shown that indeed avocado greatly enhances absorption. So I don't know if this person's reading the literature and wanted to like highlight that study, but that study almost made it into my presentation, and then I just ran out of time and it didn't make it in. But yeah, so as I said, any type of fat, it doesn't matter what the type of fat is. Any type of fat is going to help your body to absorb those carotenoids. And the reason is because the carotenoids are fat soluble. So that's why they end up in the brain, because your brain is also made of fat. So in order to get them from your small intestine into your blood, you need to have some sort of fat to allow it to get absorbed.
So here's another on the same, I guess, on the topic of oil and fats. As a vegetarian or someone allergic to fish, what do you recommend for omega-3?
That is a really good question. So again, I didn't get into the whole omega-3 talk. That's a whole hour in and of itself. The omega-3s also are a family of nutrients. So DHA is the type that literally is in your brain, but the DHA has cousins that can be converted into DHA. So when you eat for example, walnuts and flax seeds, you're getting one type of omega-3, which your body can convert. Now, conversion varies from person to person. We know women can convert, I think, about like 40% of their type of omega-3 that's in walnuts and flaxseed into the DHA type. Men are much less efficient at converting. So if for women, I usually advise, like, I do think that they can try to get their omega-3s from walnuts and flax seeds. For men, it's a little more tricky. Other options you can pursue are, there are like seaweed based supplements, because that's where the fish get it. Like the fish are eating this like plankton and stuff, and that's where they're getting the omega-3 from. So you can technically bypass the fish and go straight to their food source. But that would only be available in supplement form. And it's not to say that that's bad. It probably like just hasn't been studied enough, that we don't have enough studies to say that it would decrease cognition. And we don't know, maybe it probably has some effect. I just can't quantify it for you.
Here's another interesting question. I'm not sure if you'll have the answer to this, but does being hypothyroid and on a synthetic thyroid supplement impact your absorption of food?
That's a good question. I am not aware of any research that suggests. I do know that thyroid hormone does a lot of things in the body, and it can be associated with various GI side effects. So I'm going to assume if you're somebody who doesn't have any GI related side effects due to your thyroid disease, I think you'd be fine. If you're somebody who's having GI issues, then that would be a more complex question, and maybe there would be an issue. But I don't know of any like very well known thyroid effects on nutrient absorption. It's not a well documented thing.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes the questions. So I'll hand this over to Ruth. Thanks again, Mary. That presentation was incredible. I'm definitely going to rewatch it.
Thank you.
Matt, I couldn't agree with you more. This was fantastic. And I know, Mary, you couldn't see all of the chat, but people just kept saying, this is fantastic. She's a great speaker. This is wonderful. And I just have to say, it's probably the most informative and easy to understand presentation I've seen.
Ever.
And yeah, it was just fantastic. So thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. We had, I think, 350 or 400 people online today. So that's fantastic. So thank you for joining us. And also there'll be a survey if you can kindly fill that out. And then next week, May 6th, not sort of such an invigorating topic, but I think one that people are very interested in is with Dr. Adrienne Owen presenting on cognitive and neurological consequences of COVID-19. But today, Mary, we were inspired. And so thank you for that. And thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see you next Thursday. Take care, everyone.
Everybody, get your green leafy vegetables in.